And here's what they did. They divide up the world into quartiles, 25%, least free, third, most free, and then measure them against a lot of interesting variables that we would normally consider wealth. And the first one I put is not per capita income, but one of the things we get when we have high per capita income, life expectancy. How long will you live? The difference here between the least free quartile, average 57.7, and the highest of 79, and you see quite a clear progression between them. Some people think, especially anti-globalization activists, say, oh, we're not too worried about that, so what? High at 57. Or remember, it's an average at 31, 28. These are people, rich people in rich countries, who complain about increasing lifespan in poor countries. Imagine that I came to you and I said, I've got a gift for you. The gift is 21.3 years of additional life. Could you imagine a better gift than that? It means you'll get to see and know your grandchildren. You'll see your children grow up to adulthood. First off, they won't die when they're babies. They'll grow to adulthood, and you'll get to meet their children. That's a really important gift, and I don't think there's any culture that doesn't value that. Contrary to the anti-globalization mentality, that's a uniquely Western value. I don't believe it. Every society considers that a benefit. Now we can look at the thing most people would look at first, and I thought was not the most important. Per capita income. Average $3,882, average $31,480. That's quite a substantial difference. Correlated robustly with economic freedom. Foreign direct investment, something that's often focused on in developing countries, although I should point out, I think it's a mistake to focus too much on FDI, or foreign direct investment, to the exclusion of domestic capital formation. Remember, the first countries that got rich did not get rich because of foreign direct investment. It's a logical problem. Someone had to develop their own capital first. The English did not get rich because the Swiss invested in them. They created their own capital. But nonetheless, people often focus on FDI. Domestic capital formation, in my opinion, is actually more important and interesting variable. Environmental performance. We often hear the claim, oh, sure, you get richer, but your environment goes to hell. This is not true. Simply false. What we find is the poorest countries often have the worst environmental records. It's wealthy countries that have the income, in effect, to purchase, to afford, to buy a clean environment and environmental amenities. The correlation is not as robust as some of the others, but nonetheless strikingly positive. Now we can look at an interesting claim. It's also said, well, sure, if you become more capitalist, you get inequality. It generates inequality. Is it true? Anytime I hear a claim like that, I always ask myself, I was taught this by a very tough economist many years ago. He basically threatened to beat you if you didn't ask this question. You ask the question, is it true? And how would I know? What test to know if the claim is true or false? So you hear it said all the time, capitalism creates inequality. How would we know? We can go and measure. We can measure a lot of different measurements of income and wealth inequality. It turns out if we take one of the ones that's most interesting to those who are concerned about the plight of the poor, which is the share of income of the poorest 10%. There's virtually no correlation between economic freedom and share of income going to the lowest 10%. That's actually quite an interesting outcome. It was surprising to a lot of people when they began to look at these questions. And I don't know exactly why that is. But it seems the poorest 10% get about the same percentage of total income regardless of the social system or the economic system in the country. But here's a little bit different. This is very interesting. the percentage of total income seems about the same, but the absolute amount of total income is drastically different. $961 annual on average, $8,730. So if you're concerned about absolute levels of well-being, economic freedom matters a lot. If you're concerned about income distribution, particularly for the poorest, it doesn't seem to have a big impact, positive or negative. But it does have a big impact in that the poorest people in very free countries have higher standards of living than the middle class in poor countries. That seems something worth considering. Let's look at questions of corruption. And here, a higher score means less corruption. A very strong positive correlation between economic freedom and clean government, or lower levels of corruption. Now, this is, again, a very complicated question to try to sort out why that is. One reason that comes to mind is a more free economy is one in which government officials have less favoritism to hand out. And that tends to correlate with less opportunity to extract bribes from people. Nonetheless, it's a more complicated question. There are also cultural features and sets of expectations that play into this. So this is a very complex question that social scientists are spending a lot of time trying to understand what makes one country have higher or lower degrees of corruption. A topic we might talk about later. It's of some interest, I understand, in relation to it as well. What about freedom and political rights and civil liberties? And again, here we have 1 is the highest score, 7 is the lowest. On average, the most free countries have the highest degree of freedom and political rights and civil liberties. Again, a very complicated causal story. And it's a little bit difficult to sort this out. In some ways, more press freedom has a tendency to lead to more economic freedom as well. But it's also the case, demonstratively, more economic freedom leads to more civil liberties and more political freedom. And we've seen that story in Taiwan and South Korea, both of which had been military dictatorships, relatively free economies compared to others around them, and they did generate successful internal transitions to democratic government and openness and accountability and civil and political rights. So we're going to end on that. I don't know how I went on the time, probably faster than I had intended to. But what I wanted to do here was mainly to stimulate a discussion about issues. As I did mention, in some cases, we don't know exactly the causal mechanism, how it is that more economic freedom is correlated with less corruption. There's a few examples we could give, but these are complex stories. What we do know, however, and this is really indisputable, is that a market economy in which production is oriented toward the market creates more value. More value means better lives for the average person, not just for the rich people who live up in the castle, or the rich people who live on the top of the hill, but the average person has a better life, lives longer, is more educated, higher degree of literacy, more amenities, more likelihood that they will see their children live into adulthood, and on and on and on. All the things we consider good elements of a good life are positively correlated with the free market. It doesn't tell the whole story, but it is something that's important and deserves serious consideration. I'm going to turn it over to our host now to continue the rest of the program.